Hello everybody, today we are gonna be listening to the newest interview put out by World of Darkness channel, which is Justin Achilli, talks about V5 Sabbat. I will try and for the most part be summarizing this. I will only cut to like very specific spots when I feel like I have something to say. This might not be a lot, this might be a lot. We're gonna see.
And with the old
Okay, I let him talk for like 5 minutes straight, so now we have to address a couple of things. First of all, can't go back to a sect being mysterious when there are other editions kinda telling you how the sect works. Do you think people are throwing a lot of things over to V5 by going and reading the previous books? When you write a new edition, it's not like the previous editions stop existing or not like the people stop seeking out the previous editions. So just going, oh, they're mysterious again, really does not work, because whenever anybody will sit down in front of the table and go, they're just this mysterious boogeyman called Sabbat, people are just gonna take their phones out and be like, you know, I can Google it, right? You know, they're like on Wiki, and there's like a whole bunch of lore around them, and there's like characters from them that kind of work well. Another thing is, it makes it really sound like, because you made Sabbat lose all of their holdings, which does not make sense, okay? Camarilla elders were also beckoned. Like, Camarilla elders were beckoned, then Sabbat left to find the Gehenna War, right? So Camarilla is overrun by young neonates that they themselves have no idea what they're doing. At most, have neonates and Ancilla left, because, you know, you kind of wanted to take out elders from V5 because apparently elders were EOP, even though they're mostly storytellers. Tool anyways, so question mark to that. Neonates and Ancilla are left. They are left. Okay? Sabbat tend to go for unsavory embrace tactics, including mass embraces. If what was left in neonates and Ancilla for the most part, there's absolutely no reason why Sabbat couldn't do the exact same, and why they had to throw their domains in order to leave, and why they're not coming back as a full force, as an army. Why are they this sort of little pack enemy that you're putting in now? Because I gotta remind you, it wasn't just Camarilla domains, Sabbat had like full-on domains, and now you make it sound like it's like, oh, a little bit of a Sabbat infestation starts in your town, and they're like, chronicle specific threat because we threw like 8 vampires into the mix. Like, there's absolutely no reason why they wouldn't spread like a scourge. There's absolutely no reason why they wouldn't take back the domains. There's absolutely no reason why they wouldn't be organized. Oh, they painted themselves target because of the Second Inquisition. Well, remember that point where you burned all of the Camarilla's cash because they took it out of banks because they got really paranoid about that? You would think that that would also completely throw off Camarilla and paint targets on them. Remember how in a lot of games, Camarilla actually used the Second Inquisition in order to paint target on Anarchs, or Anarchs betrayed other Anarchs, or Camarilla betrayed other Camarilla to Second Inquisition, like the visual novels, for example, and we're gonna be treating them as canon. Remember all that? It's not like, you can't just be like, oh, Sabbat were super affected by Second Inquisition, because if anything, the Sabbat might be super unaffected by Second Inquisition, because yes, they would rule their domains by force, but they would rule their domains by force between vampires. There are even blurbs saying that some Sabbat towns are like extra safe for people because they're practically ruled with an iron fist. Some towns, everybody knows about vampires because it is a Sabbat town, but it is once again ruled by an iron fist. It's not... It would be like that weird Transylvanian town that you just wouldn't get entry into if you were a Psy, not like it would just crash and burn. So my brain just does not compute.
Nightmare on Elm Street movies, like the first one, you see Freddy in the shadows and the darkness, and he's kind of raking his claw across things, and it's really scary. He's only on screen for like 3 minutes in the whole movie or something, and then it gets later in the series, and you see him more, and he's in kind of situations where you know more about him. He becomes less scary. You know who he is, and so we wanted to go back to that kind of scary in the shadows sort of thing. And a lot of times, when we're working together, I'll say things like, we know too much about vampires, right? Horror as a genre really thrives on the unknown. When a player knows something, oh, okay, I know how to deal with that. I know what that is. But then when that, goes away, it really kind of puts the players in a position where they have to, make decisions, without perfect information. They feel like their characters are at risk. We really wanted to bring that to the forefront with the 5th edition Sabbat.
Absolutely.
And
I know what La Sombra can do. And when I know that in my chronicle it is likely a La Sombra that is on my character's asses, that makes it extra scary. Just the fact that I know what it is does not mean that it is any less scary or that my chronicle is any less prepared to deal with it. The fact that I know what it is out of character especially. My in-character characters don't necessarily need to have this info, so that the hold them in the shadows argument does not really fly.
So there's a lot of existing Sabbat structure there that has fallen away, or that the Sabbat has set aside to go fight the Gehenna War, and so the Sabbat really is in a situation. It's very desperate. Its world is crumbling. There was a while there when the Sabbat was actively challenging the Camarilla. We're rival powers. We're on equal footing here, and all of a sudden, that has eroded from the Sabbat in the era of the Second Inquisition. And
the for fuck's sake!
Exactly. And after, of course, reading everything that we've done for the Sabbat book and listening to you, so I know that the way that Sabbat is portrayed in V5 is really scary. There's a lot of very, very...
They used to be on equal footing, and now they're not, because we wrote them in order to not be the equal footing with the pathetic organization that has scorched all of their money on fire, that has all of their elders gone, and actually is on very wobbly legs. What? I'm sorry. You actually painted Camarilla pathetic enough in order for Anarchs to be able to take on Camarilla, which was a pathetic organization to begin with, because Anarchs are normally highly disorganized. Therefore, it is hard for them to make a very specific push when it comes to that. So you already had to throw Camarilla out of organization to make that work. So now, in order for the Sabbat to not have equal footing with the Camarilla, you had to throw absolutely everything that I have ever owned. They're now murder hobos.
Frightening things in there that can frighten a coterie of vampires and be used as a very great tool to bring horror into horror. Hence, I think it's a very good time to ask the very big question, which a lot of especially the old players are asking themselves right now. Why antagonists in particular?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that we went back and forth on. I started working on this even before I actually started at Paradox. We were talking about how to approach this, and one of the things that we really wanted to do was V5 very much puts the concept of humanity at the center of the game. It is Vampire's central theme, right? The riddle of humanity, a beast I am, lest a beast I become.
That is why you took out elders, because humanity does not work long term. Yeah, just focus on that concept that does not work long term. Does not work long term? What do? I know, I'm just gonna remove all the old people.
is really at the core of what the 5th edition of Vampire is. And so the Sabbat are the vampires who, a beast I am, and that's it, right? They don't care about humanity, right? They have indulged the beast. They have given themselves wholly to the beast. And so, they don't even care about observing these tenets of humanity. And so putting them as a kind of player-facing option would really undermine the core themes of the game. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure there are players who are going to play some...
Majority of paths do not really allow you to be a murder hobo, and paths are what Sabbats kind of use. You don't kill without purpose. With some paths, it is a sin to kill regardless why you kill, like Path of Lilith. And that path also includes not it being a sin to be afraid of final death, it being a sin of not taking pain. Like, that is like whole on screw self-preservation path, if anything. But a lot of these paths, they don't really let you be a murder hobo. It's not about being a beast, it is about not being human. Some of these paths are about preserving the godliness, for God's sakes, because Cain did not seek redemption, so we must. We must be better than Cain by seeking redemption. You're now like taking a whole bunch of different moral factors and going, giving in to the beast. It would be as if declaring that there is one right philosophy to live by. It's kind of ridiculous.
Sabbat, once they've got the rule book, I have no doubt about it. Everything is there if you absolutely want to do it. But really, for thematic focus,
absolutely want to do it.
Those mysterious, scary, unrelatable monsters to be in the antagonist's role. The less you know about
unrelatable monsters,
because they don't care about the same things that you do. In many cases, you don't relate to them. They are the cautionary tale. This is, if you don't heed your humanity, you become that. And what's really cool about this too, I think, is I'm working on
if you don't heed your humanity, you end up on path of enlightenment, son, and then you might end up being extra godly. Wait, what? I feel like when you take that kind of attitude to the Sabbat, it just sounds like you really did not understand your assignment. On what the heck you were writing. I am sure you have read previous editions, right? We're absolutely certain of that. And what's with the small sass of if you must? Jesus Christ, let players play what they enjoy playing. It's not your job to dictate what players are supposed and not supposed to play.
A separate document for this is you can often find yourself almost in alignment with the Sabbat, with a common enemy, right? Like, let's say you've got this coterie of anarchs that your chronicle is about, and you've got this prince, you fucking hate this prince, and here comes the Sabbat into town, right? And they hate the prince too. So, like, where does the balance of power shift? You've got hatred of the prince in common with them, but they want to kill you or convert you and, perform diablerie on you. And, if you don't come over to their way of thinking, they're going to kill you to, make sure that those horrible antediluvians are no longer able to manipulate their pawns. And so you've got stuff in common with them, but you've got stuff in common with the prince too. And that forces those hard choices. And those hard choices then come back to the humanity question, right? What will you do to make sure you survive in this situation?
Yeah, how far will you go? And speaking of how far will you go, I'm actually, very frightened. We're not going to talk about it in detail yet, but I'm very frightened personally about some of the discipline powers which are in this book and how they can be used in the campaigns by players. So here's the question. Of course, the discipline powers can give a lot of the inspiration inspiration for people to use them as antagonists. Like antagonists in the game can use these discipline powers, but can players use them as well? Is there some content which we can take for our playable characters in Sabbat book?
You bet. And that's part of the reason why we print the disciplines as opposed to just doing them as special abilities for the antagonists. And so, like, here's a great example of what you're talking about. There's a discipline in the game that allows you to recall, or a discipline in the book that allows you to recall vitae from wherever you have it in the world. You know, if that ghoul has some of your vitae over there, wherever you are, if you desperately need it, you can take it, right? And it really stings them. You know, it may leave them nothing but a brittle husk at the very end of it. And the Sabbat, of course, they don't care about it, right? But you, as a character, as a vampire who still observes humanity, you know, this is going to cause stains when you completely destroy someone, you know, without any consideration for you know, their well-being, even if you're going to leave them alive. And so that sort of provokes those moral questions.
Okay, we have practically all the playable clans that used to be on the Sabbat side introduced with the companion. We have Tezmitzi, we have Salubri, we have Lasombra, because for some reason Lasombra has decided to join Camarilla and decided to exchange like a lick for a lick. So one life taken for one Lasombra entering the Camarilla, which from Lasombra point of view, where the fittest must live, is completely fine, by the way, but that was an odd choice. But if we have all clans already playable, where are these disciplines coming from? Will you normally make $45 DLC disciplines? People have to end up with 18 books just to have all the disciplines for their characters? Is this The Sims now? Is it? And furthermore, what do you mean Sabbat don't care about their ghouls? You read V20 Ghouls and Revenants companion book, right? I mean, ghouls have a standing underneath vampires always, and Sabbat do consider them to be lesser, but they serve a function with full-on Revenant families, like serving an even deeper function of being your eternal servants. They're your bodyguards. They're your shopping assistants. They take care of your human mundane shit for you. What do you mean they just wouldn't care about that? I mean, if you go through all the trouble of training Earl the Revenant to be your bodyguard, and he has been doing a good job for the last 40 years, you wouldn't just be like, snap Earl gone in order for me to just get a bit of a long distance sip here. You wouldn't do that. It would be like saying, hey, you can torch money in order to be able to get instant shit. But the money is like permanently gone and it's a larger sum. It's like, you can get this Mercedes right now, but instead of costing you $200,000, $1 million has just left your account. How about that? And maybe in an extreme situation, you're like, yeah, that is something that I must do. But at the same time, you wouldn't be like, oh, that faction, they don't care about money. You know, they would still care about money.
Again, that are really at the center of vampire. You know, if a Sabbat vampire uses this discipline, it doesn't matter to them. But if you use it, you're not on equal footing with them. You still get the same benefit of it, but you have those moral qualms that they don't. And of course, those are at the center of the Chronicles. Those are what, you know, a beast I am, lest a beast I become. Can I behave like that is always focal.
Yes, and the amounts of stains are also suggested there, just for the storytellers who are eager to know. And there was actually a very interesting question from a chat, which I would love to hear your answer to. Do you think there's any disconnection in between the themes of horror as horror and the power vampire fantasy? Do you think there's any both can take from each other, or how would you answer that?
Yeah, this is a really good question, and the way we think of it in our brand team, it's actually one of the brand pillars. And the way we describe the pillar is it's a different kind of power fantasy. So being a vampire doesn't necessarily mean that you are, the strongest or the toughest or the one who's going to survive everything in the room. It could be you walk into the room and all eyes are on you. Everyone is fascinated by you. And so, when we say power, there's definitely a power fantasy to being a vampire. But what's important to vampire is that power has a cost. A beast I am, lest the beast I become again, right? I'm willing to use this power, but at what cost? And so what's really important for horror outside of vampire is that there needs to be some amount of hope.
Yeah.
And humanity represents that, right? Like you can keep carrying on, you can maintain your humanity. You don't give yourself wholly to the beast, because if you do give yourself to the beast, you become a wight. The game is the game is over for that character, right? And so to be able to have that hope, to be able to maintain that humanity, really is the central struggle of the game. And so I don't think that's at odds with the power fantasy of being a vampire. In fact, using the powers of being a vampire calls that humanity into question. So I think it's right on the money there.
Yeah, hot take, but you don't actually need humanity. I know that's like a core design feature for Vampire the Masquerade, but hot take, you really don't, because so far when I was playing a Chronicle, all these shit moments are coming not from, well, my character lose a bit of humanity. I am on 5 humanity, and honestly, I do not give a shit. It gets harder to lose it, the lower you go, and you can buy it back up. Of course, this is like in V20 edition. I would maybe worry if I got myself to like 3, but such specific actions lose humanity that really I don't give a shit. I could have started on 2 and I would still not give a shit, because it's kind of hard to drop to 1. It kind of is actually hard to drop to 1. All of the issues come from the campaign, from your inability to maneuver things politically and kind of strangling yourself in your own noose one event at a time, and there being other people that are scarier than you from sheer number perspective, or from just the Sombra is scary. Like, honestly, it would work without humanity. Wouldn't actually make a difference at all.
Interesting. And okay, so let's take it from a different perspective now. Let's say we have ongoing chronicles from V5. People are right now playing V5. They have their own characters, chronicles, and their story. How will their characters and their coteries be able to interact with the Sabbat using this book? What are going to be the examples of how we can insert Sabbat into our chronicles?
Yeah, awesome. There's an entire chapter about how to, as a storyteller, integrate the Sabbat into your chronicle. And so the Sabbat is, of course, fighting the Gehenna War. And one of the notions of war is that there's hot war, which is, the actual, physical conflict, the war itself. But there's also cold war. There's this idea of, that spies are among us and they're trying to overturn the domain from within and that sort of thing. And so, right off the bat there's 2 different ways. You can go into, immediate physical conflict once the Sabbat rolls into town and everything catches on fire. Or you can continue to play the political game. The Sabbat, for all of its mysteriousness and unrelatability, it does continue to maintain like networks of spies. The different paths operate differently. And so, you may have a member of, let's say, the Path of Cathari. In this edition, one of their nicknames is the Devils of the Flesh, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they've moved into the city, and they're not, fist fighting and throwing Molotov cocktails. But they've started this weird blood cult now, and more of the local kindred are being seduced by this blood cult. And oh my gosh, they've got this army of ghouls who are performing, these basically blood orgies with, and all of a sudden,
Oh,
this
sounds
is a
like a
force to be
cool
reckoned
thing to
with. It's
join.
all happened under your nose. So
Honestly.
there's a number of different ways for you to interact with the Sabbat.
Why would I care about a
and
blood
one
orgy?
of the things we wanted to do using the paths of enlightenment
Sounds
is to
fun.
have those become the kind of ways you're interacting with them. So, when a pack that follows the path of Cain comes into town, maybe they're a little more overt, or pack following the path of power and the inner voice. But then if you've got a Sabbat pack that's following the path of death and the soul, or the Cathari, they're going to maybe operate, maybe not as subtly necessarily, but they're going to have these different ways that they're going to challenge not only the status quo but the coterie itself.
Yeah, and speaking of the paths very quickly, there was also an interesting question, which I guess I will reiterate a little bit. So you did mention on your Twitter when you were mentioning about Sabbat in different editions. There's a very interesting tweet from Justin that sums up in very short epithet on what's kind of a role Sabbat plays in different editions. So you mentioned the medieval death cult, right? And of course you do mention paths, and there is this sort of indoctrination going on. So how does exactly what's the theme of that? How does this religiousness of Sabbat work?
About the medieval death cult, I remember reading that phrase in the vampire book, like before I worked at White Wolf, way back in the day. When I was playing the game, and that stuck with me, and that has always stuck with me. And that's a phrase I have used in every edition of the book that I've worked on. So it showed up early on, and subsequently in the Guide to the Sabbat from the revised edition, and in V20. That phrase itself exists in there because that has always been such a beautifully evocative phrase for me. Okay. But where it fits into kind of that religious notion and indoctrination, one of the things that changes in V5 from the earlier editions is that it is less of a religious outlook. Don't get me wrong, the Sabbat is still very, very cultic. They de-individuate and they dehumanize and they break you down. And the path itself is almost, because it replaces humanity, it's a different operating system. You're no longer a person trying to maintain what you as a person think is important. You are trying to bring yourself closer to Cain, and that becomes this all-consuming drive for you, right, as a member of the path of Cain. And so they're less of a religion now. They're less even of a philosophy, and they become something that completely supplants the outlook of the vampire. And the reason this is true is because these Sabbat vampires, the Sabbat sees itself as this apex creature, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't care about the masquerade. Humans are there, mortals are there to be consumed, and
this
they don't
is
even
one very long
really
thought.
want to cultivate. They're not farmers, because a farmer cares about his cattle. A Sabbat doesn't give a shit about any of that. For whatever reason, for whatever justification that path is inputting there.
If you killed the cattle, you can't have any more
and that's
food.
one of the changes too, is that the nature of the packs themselves, the packs in these desperate times for the Sabbat, are really these kind of cells, these clusters of the paths of enlightenment themselves. So in almost every pack you encounter, they will have this path in common, which makes them more efficient, which makes them more kind of the same outlook, sharing this kind of cultic hive mind. And obviously, because they don't have anything in common, that makes them that much more difficult to relate to, and therefore fearsome.
Exactly. That's very interesting. So this is so basically we can expect that paths will be way more present in the Sabbat's.
I feel like it really did not answer the question about the religiousness and the Sabbat. I guess that I am kind of happy that he didn't name the only religious sect as the antagonists, because those are just some at their level of connotations, because Camarilla and Anarchs tend to be a bit more atheist. But honestly, the access, every sect could be improved by the access to the paths. It should just be a more common thing.
Characters, antagonists that we are going to meet in the game. Now, an interesting question as well is how does Sabbat nowadays, because we had a lot of different views on that in the previous editions, what's the outlook on clans from Sabbat's perspective?
That's a great question. One of the other things that I always loved about the Sabbat was that it leaned into this notion of anti-tribu, right? That there was this clan, and because we are the Sabbat, we're going to frame ourselves as anti-tribu. We are the opposite of that clan, and so one of the things that I greatly enjoy about a new edition is a chance to explore new ideas with this. And so, for going back to again, before I even was working at Paradox, I was thinking, okay, well, what does anti-tribu really mean? It doesn't just mean like we're the opposite of you, right? What it really means, especially in the context of the Sabbat, is a sect that hates the antediluvians. And so when they say anti-tribu, they're not just saying, well, we're the opposite of whatever you made us. They are denying the idea of clans itself. So the anti-tribu in the 5th edition is this kind of greater idea of we don't even acknowledge clans. Obviously, whoever your sire is going to, you're going to have clan disciplines that make you more able to use those disciplines, etc. But as a culture, as a society, the Sabbat completely forces that down. Because it's the legacy of these hated antediluvians. But B, it also gives you a bit of personal identity that you can cling to. And the Sabbat absolutely wants to smash that out, right? And they want to take you and make you Sabbat as opposed to Toreador anti-tribu or Bruja anti-tribu. So you become Sabbat, you become this, vampire first and Sabbat second and path member third, and like clan doesn't even figure into it. And that's one of the things also that I think helps make them scary is, this thing, this part of your identity.
How are all the things that you mentioned not part of somebody's personality? How would adding the personalization of you are also a clan member impact that you're vampire first, your spat second, your path follower third, and look, you can add you're a member of the clan fourth, and it would change nothing. It would change nothing. He's like, this is a part of personality that you can cling to. So is being member of a path. So is having clan-specific weaknesses, actually. Especially if you're Tzimitzi and get overly attached to electronics and implant them in your body. That's highly customizable and very personalific. Yes. They want to smash all of your personality out. Why? I mean, humanity, sure, but personality got nothing to do with humanity, and adding clan in the fourth thing, not having it at all, makes absolutely no difference here.
Into vampire is, finding this clan that's right for you, and the Sabbat wants to completely suborn that, right? They want to destroy that, they want to throw that away, and crush that out of you. And, that as part of your vampire identity becomes a thing that the Sabbat vampires want to destroy in you.
Yeah, and there's people asking in the chat about particular clans and what the newly brought V5 Sabbat book is going to mean for clans such as La Sombra or Tzimitzi, which are already introduced to V5. Are there going to be any changes? Are we going to see them differently, or how do they play in this kind of an ex-Sabbat role?
So we don't examine a huge amount of it in the Sabbat book. The book itself is very focused on the here and now. How can you use the Sabbat now? But one of the things that I will not really tease here, but kind of call you back to the appearance of the La Sombra in the Chicago by Night book. And the La Sombra, they're not fools, right? They saw the Sabbat over time resulting in this sort of desperate situation, and they're wise enough to have orchestrated their exit from the Sabbat. And so that the Chicago by Night kind of tells the story
Wise enough.
Sabbat, or the La Sombra are leaving this behind. They saw it coming, they got out. And so for the players, you can of course still be La Sombra because the La Sombra aren't part of the Sabbat anymore. And formally, as a clan,
wasn't the split 50-50?
There are of course still Sabbat in still La Sombra in the Sabbat. If you look at the cover, you'll see one.
Aren't they right at the top?
They've made their exit.
A very particular one on.
And she's in the book, and she's kind of an example of all these concepts in play too.
Yeah.
And of course, there's these rumors. Oh, she was destroyed. Lucita was destroyed, and okay, well, what about that? What's happening over there that someone who sure looks a lot like her is doing this thing?
Ellie has a very dark secret, let's say. Awesome. No, that's great, and this actually, gives us a lot of more insight into how to play, La Sombra and Simitsi without that, exactly the Sabbat identity in the
Does
main
it?
events. But we talked a lot about, the positioning of Sabbat in the V5 and the Sabbat characters in V5. So about the indoctrination, about the difference between being on the path and being like extremely like blinded by it, and being on humanity, right? About the disciplines that they wield and the way that they wield them in very dangerous and creepy ways. So in general, to sum it up, how are Sabbat vampires different from other vampires?
Yeah, great question. And that, again, is one of the opportunities I wanted to make sure we took with the fifth edition, was to, contrast them so strongly. The core rules for V5, again, put humanity at the forefront of the game. And to me, this is a way to, I've deliberately I look at V5 as an opportunity to kind of go back to the basics, to fall in love with the world of darkness again, and to experience it anew. And of course, as a player, if you've been playing it for several years, you won't be able to truly, have that feeling of finding the book and what the hell is this about, and figuring it all out there.
Yeah.
But it's a chance to kind of go back to what it means to be a vampire, just at its roots. You wake up and you need blood. You wake up and there's this society of monsters out there.
New player here. Literally only have my first Chronicle running for like 4 sessions at the moment. I read V5 and I read V20 and I chose V20 over V5 for the simplistic reason of there is more options. I do not require to buy additional DLC books. I only require the 1 core book in order to get the most options for the most possible clans. I do not require to buy specific dice. I have more playing options, including being able to play with elders if I want to, or get to elder level abilities if I want to, even though that would require an incredible amount of diablerization of other vampires, because the highest generation that you can even start with is 8. Now it's down to even 10. Effectively, V20 gave me more choices and had a more cohesive and coherent world that I do not actually have that much trouble understanding. V5 felt like a lot of cut content, while still having plenty of rules. So it just felt like you cut content for cut content's sake. Like it gives me empty vibes. Empty vibes. Like if I look at what I can play in V5, I have to play something fairly vanilla. If I look at what I can play in V20, I can beat something quite weird. Especially with all the splintered bloodlines. Ooh, splintered bloodlines were confusing for some people. That's good. They don't have to use them. But if I want variety and my storyteller allows, well, the Samedi and Nagaraja have completely different clan weaknesses, which means more choice for me. It's kind of like saying you can be a bard, or you can be an archer, or you can be an archer bard. And then somebody comes in and goes, those are too many options, your pretty little head can't handle them, therefore you can only be a bard only. Well, that is nice, but what if I wanted to dual class, Beanie?
In the night, and that's, I think, really important as well. Is we're not positioning the Sabbat as the bad guys, we're positioning them as the ones without humanity. So
Mm-hmm.
the Camarilla has its own moral problems. The Anarchs have their own moral problems. All of these are represented by humanity, but the Sabbat is different from them because it doesn't observe humanity. It takes up these monstrous codes, these deliberately alien. I'm no longer going to be that. In fact, I'm going to eat what I once was. And so, really being able to almost look at something else and have, I'm a vampire in common with them, but that other vampire is looking at you, and unless you become what it is, it will as readily eat you. It will, drink your heart's blood as readily as it will consume a mortal's blood. So it's what they think vampires are and what the Camarilla and Anarchs think vampires are two very different things. And so when they come into a chronicle, those differences really come to the fore.
Now I'm going to ask you one more question when it comes to the content. Although we are going to talk about content later on next month,
I'm now gonna point out that if there is a blood hunt called on somebody, you can eat them by Camarilla rules, and then Camarilla called the blood hunt on the whole of Anarchs, therefore eating vampires. It's very Camarilla thing to do now too.
to mention exactly when and what, but you spent, the whole brand team spent a lot of time working on Sabbat, and there was a lot of work that you put into this book. What was the most exciting part of the book for you to come up with, to write the design?
The hardest part was absolutely the paths.
Mm-hmm.
We spent a good deal of our word count giving the storyteller advice on how to make Sabbat vampires feel alien, and there's stuff in there about you walk into a Sabbat vampire's lair. In many cases, the pack is even sharing a communal haven. They don't have individual havens; they're all staying together. And you're seeing these weird and unsettling objects that they've collected.
I mean, so are Anarchs
there's stuff
apparently.
talking about how the Sabbat doesn't even, in many cases, they won't even speak to communicate with one another. They'll read each other's body language, or they'll make strange insectile clicking noises. Again, they're different from these other vampires who have these other societies. But all of that comes as a result of these paths. These paths are such radically different outlooks. They put such different values at the forefront of.
I'm sorry, who has learned insect communication skills in the Sabbat now? Insect like clicking noises. What? I mean, wasn't it Bally that used to be the swarm? Wasn't it one of the Bally paths that included being very We Are Legion-like, so would interpret better based on your outright body language and shit? Isn't telepathy a thing? In general, I mean, yeah, it's used to be a Tremere thing, but if your vampires telepathy skilled, I would completely understand that their close-knit group does not use words to communicate. Insect noises, though.
Sabbat vampires. This was the hardest part to do, and we went, round after round and draft after draft, and they're not different enough, and there's enough there in the previous editions to give you the foundations of what you can expect here, but really having them push them away from, this isn't just something like, oh, fuck humanity, I'm done with that, and I'm going to write, a path of power in the inner voice on my character sheet. What does it mean to undertake this entirely alien, inhuman mentality and devote yourself to it? And that was, A, a huge challenge, and B, really satisfying.
Exactly. And now, okay, I gotta ask one more question, because of course when we are designing and thinking about any expansions to V5 or any other future splats that we're going to work on, there's always in the back of my mind and our minds that, hey, this may one day make it to a video game or a TV show or a movie or a comic book. How do you feel, or maybe how would you be excited to see Sabbat used in these ways? in these different mediums.
Exactly. I was watching the interview about Rivals before we started here, and I thought, oh, this would be perfect to introduce as, if they could come up with an antagonist mechanic, or maybe even I have this dangerous alliance with a Sabbat character, as one of my, whether the game term for it is retainers or however it fits into the system, stuff that really this in the tabletop game is there to shake up the status quo of your chronicle.
Yeah.
How can we use the Sabbat to shake up the status quo of Rivals, right? Or of Vendetta, or of one of the video games in production, recognizing what the Sabbat characters are doing
Was Rivals
is
the
almost
card
like
one?
recognizing a silhouette. Like if you're playing, a shooter and you see an outline of, an enemy and oh, this is the big bulky one, that's the heavy. If you see a character who's acting a certain way and you've already been introduced, like, oh, that must be one of the, he's carrying a skull and these ghostly minions, or this must be the path of death and the soul, right? So they become these.
I am sorry, but you can't just. Can you just imagine a vampire just like throttling through the middle of the town, like whoop-de-doop-de-doo, with just like a random ass skull in front of them? Actually, I have one. Give me a sec. Okay, gang, are you ready? This is how we roleplay the Sabbat. Just carry that in front of you, and then everybody can recognize your alliance. Jesus Christ, I mean, if I needed to have a skull on me, especially like a human skull or something, just for convenience sake, I would craft that into a hat or into a bowl or something. I wouldn't like carry it in my arm.
These expressions of what it means to be a vampire, to be an antagonist, and to have that gameplay interaction there. Oh, I can't wait for this stuff. Oh.
That's great. One more very good question from the chat. How will the book differ from the other sect books from V5? Is there going to be any differences? How did we approach it? Or what is going to be similar?
Yeah, that's an awesome question right there. One of the things that we have noticed in terms of the other sect books is that the other sect books, as they were conceived, were more of an idea like almost like a coffee table book, right? Like you would pick up the book about the anarchs and you would read a variety of like these different vignettes of what it means to be an anarch and have the anarch experience. And this one is much more focused on kind of front loading in the book, kind of the organization of the chapters itself, because it's more focused as a game book than a coffee table book. Here's this piece and here's how to use it in the game. Here's this piece and here's how to use it in the game. Here's this path. Here's some antagonists who represent the path. Here's how to use them. The Rite, right? The Auctoritas Rite and the Ignobilis Rite. These rituals that the Sabbat use to reinforce loyalty to the sect and to the pack. Here's how you use those. And so as a player, you probably aren't going to be performing the Valdery because that's how they create loyalty to one another. But when you see this thing happening, what does that mean? Oh, one of the things that I absolutely love about this too is this the rite of the mass embrace. The creation rites. And so the Sabbat, when it has been doing these kind of retreating efforts, has been leaving these time bombs of mass graves in their former domains. So, as Camarilla and Anarch Kindred are moving into like, oh, this used to be, a Sabbat city. I'm Prince now. Okay, well, there's a giant buried tomb of blood slavering unbirthed that are just waiting to pull themselves out of the ground and fuck up your domain. So ways to use the Rite, that help. They don't become just bits of stuff you see on screen. There's a gameplay element to it.
Yeah, and okay, so we got a lot of answers in here, but of course we are going to talk more about Sabbat before the release, and there's an event coming in June called Elysium event. We talked about it already with Matt when we talked about Rivals, and you are going to be on this, during this event, you will be there, and there are going to be more reveals, right? Can you tease us, what are you going to reveal during the Elysium?
You bet. The panel itself is myself and Elisa, who is the RPG's producer at Renegade. We're going to be talking about the Book of Nod because they're planning a release of the Book of Nod and how you would use the Book of Nod in a chronicle and how it relates to the Sabbat, for example. And of course, the Sabbat's holy book is the Book of Nod. You know, this is the Chronicle of Cain. This is the Chronicle of Shadows. These are the things that Cain experienced and the antediluvians witnessed and why they need to be destroyed. And so there, I want us to be able to give away early on a kind of preview. I want to show one of the paths so players can see, how the paths are laid out. I want to show some more art. I want to release, some more about how the anti-tribu work. We're still discussing, what format this is going to be in. It's probably going to be a PDF. I, want to make sure that Jason's good with us, the pieces we do want to give away to set the tone.
Of course.
And one of the other things too that I thought was really cool was, their announcement was that Sabbat's going to be available in August, right?
Yes.
And so, I thought this was going to be, September, October, November, but we had the book laid out and sent to them. It got printed and moved over here faster than I had anticipated. So, I thought that was awesome that people get it sooner. So
yeah.
That was really cool to me.
Pandemic is ending, so we're going to. I hope it's ending. I really hope I won't jinx it, but we are going to definitely see things speeding up when it comes to printing and everything like that. So I'm very happy that people will be able to play with Sabbat in their Chronicles in August. Any last words as for today to our community, Justin?
Well, it wouldn't be a Sabbat discussion if I didn't say praise Cain as I said farewell. So,
thank you so much, Justin. And
what about Lilith followers? They're also part of Sabbat, so okay. Interesting interview. This will probably just be released as my live thoughts because I can't honestly be arsed with editing all of this. You see, the issue for me is that I didn't get all that much from the interview. I am happy that they worked on paths a lot because that would be a primary thing that you would work on. I am confused about the fact that they're releasing extra disciplines as DLC. Of all things, I thought that was just supposed to be the main book. If you need more than the main book in order to play clans that are inside the main book, or if you're one of the people at your table wants to use disciplines from a DLC book and you do not own a DLC book, how do you handle that? Do you actually force your storytellers to buy all the books? Is that the idea? Because if it is the idea, I do not fly with me. The fact that they're we want to make them recognizable from a distance, especially inside video game setting, by maybe making vampires scary around a prop like a skull, that sounded so cartoony that it's really worrisome. But the issue for me is that the interview doesn't really do all that much for me. And I would gladly review these books, but they're $45 a pop. That is a lot of money, especially if they're releasing a lot of these books. And when your core was as dry and empty as I saw V5 main book being, I would be very how to put this? I wouldn't be very likely to pay $45 to $50 a pop in order to just see if an extra book maybe fills the gap and maybe makes the main edition more complete. I don't have that money. This sounds like buying a video game. And it's yeah, if I bought The Sims 4 after playing The Sims 2, this is actually a good analogy. And I go, The Sims 4 is really empty. And The Sims 2 was full of stuff. And EA goes, it's okay. The Sims 4 can also have stuff. $50 a pop. Even though it's the newest thing. Even though it's the thing that's gonna get development time dedicated to it that progresses the whole story and everything, I will be like, okay, it's pretty vague. The information about whether or not I would like this $50 DLC is pretty vague. I don't think I want to pay $50 just to figure out if I like it or not. And unlike a video game, as well, you don't even have a 2-hour grace period on returns. It's just, you don't like the book that you got, tough titties unless it's damaged. So in the end, for whoever is sticking with V5, I hope that this is a good rendition of Sabbat for you. I really do, but I am not too sure if Justin understood the assignment when writing them. I mean, they might be alright. I liked the whole path things. I like hearing that they invested a lot of time into that. That sounds like a good idea, yes. But the moment when they were like, so tight-knit, that they communicate like insects, not even people, and they carry skulls in front of them, outstretched at all times. That's how you know that it's the Sabbat. You know, these kind of statements, they really throw me off, like, are we talking about the same characters? Because once again, all of your old shit does not just suddenly get erased off the face of the earth. It actually completely, definitely does exist. So I can Google this kind of things, and when you make these kind of statements, it does sound like you're writing somebody that would just be like, I am evil! I am so evil! It sounds really cartoony. It doesn't necessarily sound appropriate. So anyways, I hope that you found my commentary enlightening, and I see you in my other videos. Fiddle.